We had a word for it in the Veth dialects. Kale Sura. Rough translation: the moment a thing you dismissed becomes the thing that saves you, and the shame of it never fully leaves. I have filed 742 incident logs across 22 years of active service. I have recorded the fall of the Drenith Corridor. I have documented the silent surrender of the Merrick Collective. I have timestamped, catalogued, and cross-referenced events that made senior commanders weep into their filtration masks. None of it prepared me for watching a single human muddy, bleeding, running on something that was definitely not sleep and possibly not sanity dismantle a 4-year Kreth siege in 11 hours. 11 hours. I know the exact time because I timestamp everything. It is a compulsion. My bunkmates used to say I would timestamp my own death. They were probably right. What follows is my official incident log for Contested Zone 7, the Bren Offensive, Cycle 1144. It has been flagged, suppressed, reflagged, and, finally, declassified after significant bureaucratic pressure from parties I am not permitted to name. I am permitted to tell you what I saw. I am not sure I have the language for it. I will try anyway. The human arrived in a cargo container. Not metaphorically. Not as a classified delivery or some dignified covert insertion. An actual cargo container, the kind used to ship filtered grain compounds and replacement coolant coils, offloaded by a dock crane operator who had no idea what he was unloading, stacked between 17 identical crates, and left in Bay 12 for 6 hours before anyone noticed the container was breathing. I noticed because I was in Bay 12 at 4:09 eating something the commissary called a protein loaf that tasted the way industrial solvents smell. I eat alone. I have always eaten alone. I find the sounds other people make while consuming food distracting in a way I cannot adequately articulate without becoming unkind. I was on my 4th bite when the container sneezed. 4 hours 9 minutes and 44 seconds, container in Bay 12, 3rd stack, 2nd row, sneezes. I note this. I did not report it immediately. This is the part of my log I considered redacting. I did not report it because I was still eating, and also because I was not certain a container had sneezed. My auditory processing is impaired in high humidity environments, and Bren 9 in the pre-cycle hours is essentially a warm fog with a floor. So I noted it, finished the protein loaf out of a kind of grim obligation, and then went to investigate. The container had a latch on the inside. Not the outside. The inside. Someone had modified it. I stood there for a moment looking at the interior latch and thinking about my career, which has been undistinguished but stable, and how stability is a thing you do not appreciate until it is about to be disrupted by a container with an interior latch that is now opening from the inside. She dropped out of it like a piece of bad news. Tall, even by human measures. Dark kit, not Veth issue, not Kreth capture, something 3rd category that I had never seen catalogued. Her face was the particular color of someone who has been in a sealed container for 6 hours without adequate ventilation. She looked at me. I looked at her. She held up one finger. Then, she vomited very efficiently in the corner, stood back up, and said something in unified common that my translator rendered as, right. Okay. What's the tactical situation? Not a question. The syntax was declarative. She was already moving toward the bay door. 4 hours 13 minutes and 1 second, human asset, unscheduled, designation unknown, requests tactical briefing while still technically in progress of recovering from transit sickness. I follow her because I cannot think of an alternative action. Her name, I learned, was Sergeant Dara Vasek. She had no authorization codes I recognized. She had 3 forms of identification, 2 of which were for different names. When I pointed this out, she said, "Yeah, I know, the 3rd one's real, the other 2 are for paperwork," and moved on as if this was a reasonable clarification. She had a scar that ran from her left jaw to just below her ear that she touched without thinking every time she was processing new information. I noticed because she touched it approximately 40 times in the first 20 minutes of our acquaintance. I started counting. I am aware this was not the most strategically useful thing I could have been doing. The situation, which I briefed her on while following her through corridors she navigated without a map, I did not ask how she knew the layout, I added it to a list of questions I was accumulating, was this: the Kreth had held the Bren corridor for 4 years. 4 years is a number I had stopped feeling the weight of somewhere around year 2. The Bren corridor connects the Veth supply chain's central artery to 6 forward operating stations. Without it, those stations operate on reserves, and reserves run out. 3 of the 6 were already running on emergency rations. The 4th had stopped responding to comms 14 days ago. We had tried conventional assault twice. The Kreth defensive line in the corridor used a layered formation we could not crack, 3 overlapping suppression fields and a mobile reserve unit that repositioned faster than our strike teams could adapt. Every attack we mounted was countered before it finished deploying. High Command's current strategy was described to me in official communications as strategic patience. I had begun to understand this meant they did not have a strategy. How many troops do they have in the corridor? Vasek asked. Estimated 400 Kreth infantry. 40 heavy units. Air support on rotation, cycles every 6 hours. How many do you have? Field Station Bren 9 maintains a complement of 63 active combatants. She stopped walking. I ran the timestamp, 4 hours 31 minutes and 17 seconds. Human asset stops walking. Expresses no emotion I can catalog. 63. Correct. She touched the scar. Looked at the ceiling. Then, she said something my translator initially refused to render, flagging it as a potential calibration error, and then, on second pass rendered as, okay. I need a map, a coffee, and whoever's been watching their patrol patterns. We have the map, I said. The coffee? We have something the commissary calls, never mind the coffee. The patrol pattern analyst was a young officer named Prith, who was 17 days out of the academy and had been assigned to Bren 9 because his examination scores were excellent and someone in posting allocation had confused excellence with the ability to function under sustained misery. He was not functioning well. He had the eyes of someone who had recently revised their understanding of how bad things could get. Vasek looked at his patrol data for 4 minutes. I timed it, 5 hours 2 minutes and 11 seconds to 5 hours 6 minutes and 48 seconds. She did not ask Prith questions. She looked at the data, and the scar got touched repeatedly, and then, she said, they rotate the same 3 suppression field positions. Prith blinked. The fields move, the fields move. The positions don't. She pointed at 3 coordinates on his map. Here, here, here. They vary the timing, but they always come back to these 3 anchor points. Why? Prith looked at the data like it had personally misled him. Terrain, he said slowly. The ground those are the only stable elevations in the corridor's western half. So they can't cover the eastern drainage channels. Prith stared. The drainage channels are impassable. The Kreth, we assessed them as non-viable approach routes in the original, for your troop types. Silence. For your troop types, she said again. Not cruel. Just precise. What's the channel depth at its widest point? I want to note, for the record, that at 5 hours and 9 minutes I updated my personal probability assessment for how the next 12 hours would unfold. I had entered the conversation estimating an 8% chance of any material change in the Bren situation within the current operational cycle. By 5 hours and 11 minutes I had revised it upward to something I was not prepared to commit to in writing. This is the part of Vasek I was slowest to understand, not because it was subtle but because it was the opposite of subtle, and I had been trained to look for subtle. What she was doing was so direct it registered as simple. It wasn't simple. It was something that looks like simplicity from one angle and looks like a different kind of intelligence from another. She was not looking for what would work for us. She was looking for what the Kreth had decided would not work. And, then, she was asking whether those decisions were made with us in mind. They weren't. The Kreth had held the corridor for 4 years against Veth assault formations, Veth tactical doctrine, Veth logistics. They knew us very well. Their defense was built around knowing us. The drainage channels were impassable for a Veth infantry unit, too narrow for standard kit, too chemically hostile for unfiltered operation, too unstable for heavy equipment. The Kreth had looked at those channels and seen nothing. correctly, for us. Vasek looked at them and saw a door they'd left unlocked. I need 6 people, she said. Anyone who's small, comfortable in confined spaces, and doesn't get rattled when things get structural. Structural? When the ground is doing things that feel like the ground shouldn't be doing. 5 hours 14 minutes and 22 seconds, I begin to compile a list of personnel who meet these criteria. I am aware this means I have decided to support an operation that has not been officially authorized. I note this without resolution. The 6 she selected were not who I would have chosen. She didn't want the strongest. She didn't want the best combat scores. She looked at the personnel files for 40 minutes, the scar got another 18 touches, I counted, and she picked 2 soldiers who had prior records for unauthorized route deviation, Veth military's preferred phrasing for taking shortcuts through areas deemed non-viable, 1 technician who had been reprimanded for improvised use of non-standard materials, which I gathered meant she had fixed things by breaking other things first, 1 medic who had a note in his files saying he performs better in degraded conditions than in controlled environments, and 2 others whose files contained the notation functions independently of command supervision, which is not a compliment in Veth service records but which Vasek appeared to find very appealing. She read that one twice. This one, she said, pointing at the second file. That notation is a disciplinary, this one. 6 hours 1 minute and 7 seconds, Vasek has assembled her team. Briefing begins. I am present. I am not certain in what official capacity. The briefing was 11 minutes long. It should have been longer. The Veth standard for a corridor infiltration of this type was a 6-hour preparation cycle with 3 rehearsal rounds. Vasek's briefing was 11 minutes because, she explained, rehearsal rounds were for when you had time and controlled conditions, and they had neither, and also, she said this without looking up from the drainage map, the more you rehearse a thing, the more you can only do it the one way. We're going to need to be able to do it differently. The 6 soldiers looked at each other. Then, they looked at her. She was checking her kit with the practiced calm of someone who had made peace with the fact that today was going to be difficult and had decided to find that interesting rather than frightening. I don't know if she'd made that peace recently or years ago. The scar suggested years ago. Questions, she asked. One of the soldiers, the one with the unauthorized route deviations, raised his hand. What's the extraction plan if the channels collapse? We improvise. What's the we improvise something different? The soldier put his hand down. He was smiling. I did not understand why he was smiling. 6 hours 12 minutes and 44 seconds, team departs for corridor approach. I remain at Bren 9. I begin updating my incident log in real time. I am not certain why I feel the need to do this. I think, and I want to be careful here because I am an intelligence attaché and not someone given to impressionistic assessments, I think I did not want to be the only one who knew what I had just watched begin. It felt like the kind of thing that should be witnessed. The drainage channels went dark at 6 hours and 19 minutes as they moved out of comb range. I had 63 soldiers at Bren 9, none of whom were authorized to act on what I had just facilitated, and I had 6 people in a chemical drainage channel who were about to do something to a 4-year-old military stalemate that no one in this station's chain of command had sanctioned. I made fresh protein loaf. I ate it alone. I timestamped every bite. 6 hours and 19 minutes to 6 hours 47 minutes and 33 seconds, waiting. Log continues. The first comm ping came back at 6:47. Single pulse. Prearranged signal, in position. I had been timing the silence, which is a thing I do when I am trying not to think too hard about something. I fill the space with numbers because numbers are honest about what they are. Silence lasted 28 minutes and 14 seconds. I had eaten the protein loaf. I had poured the thing the commissary called coffee, which smelled the way I imagine regret would smell if it had a temperature. I had not drunk it. I was using it as an object to look at while I thought. 6 hours 47 minutes and 33 seconds, first signal received. Team is in position beneath Kreth Eastern perimeter. What followed was 41 minutes in which I received no further communication and had to construct what was happening from the outside of it. This is, I have come to understand, the condition VASIC operated from most of the time. Not full information. Not clean intelligence. The outside of a thing, and the question of what shape the inside was. I had been doing intelligence work for 22 years. I was very good at gathering information. I was considerably less practiced at acting on incomplete information, because in my experience the correct response to incomplete information was to gather more of it. VASIC's experience appeared to be different. What I know of what happened in the channels, I reconstructed afterward from the team's individual debriefs, which varied significantly in their accounts of the same events, a thing I initially found concerning and, later found clarifying. People who are doing something under pressure do not experience it the same way. The variation is not error. The variation is the shape of the pressure. The channels were worse than the maps suggested. This is almost always true of maps. Maps are made by people at a distance from the thing they are mapping, and distance removes the parts that are inconvenient to record. The channels were not just narrow, they were active, moving, metabolically hostile in a way that the chemical analysis had flagged but not fully communicated. The walls of the channel were coated in a biological compound that the Kreth used in their forward defensive systems. It was not lethal, but it was a sensory irritant. In Veth physiology it would have caused enough disorientation to make progress impossible. Standard doctrine had flagged this correctly. Veth physiology. The human team was not Veth. From the debrief of Corporal Ines Marate, one of the two unauthorized route deviation soldiers, it smelled absolutely terrible. Like someone had decided to make something rot and, then, lit it on fire. My eyes were watering the whole time. VASIC said to keep going. So we kept going. From the technician, Specialist Doran Vel Osk, the compound was affecting my breathing, not badly, just persistently, like background interference. I kept thinking we should stop and assess. VASIC would look back occasionally, check if we were moving. We were moving. So she didn't stop. From the medic, whose name I am omitting because he requested it, the irritant compounds didn't hit us the way they would have hit Veth soldiers. We weren't fine, don't put in the log that we were fine. But we could handle it, and the Kreth didn't know we could handle it, and I think that was the whole point. It was the whole point. The entire approach had a single foundational logic. The Kreth had spent 4 years calibrating a defense against one kind of body, one kind of psychology, one set of tolerances. VASIC was not pretending to be a different version of what the Kreth expected. She had found the seam between what they expected and what she was, and she had walked into it. 7 hours 29 minutes and 17 seconds, second calm signal. 2 pulses. Prearranged, approaching secondary position. The secondary position was the underside of the Kreth's eastern anchor point. On the surface map it looked like nothing, a maintenance relay for their suppression field infrastructure, moderately guarded, not a priority target in any Veth assessment I had seen. Veth tactical doctrine favored attacking the suppression fields directly, neutralizing them through force. We had tried this. Twice. The Kreth response time was faster than our assault cycles. VASIC had looked at the map for 4 minutes, and what she had seen, what Prith and I had not seen in 4 years of looking at the same map, was that the maintenance relay didn't just service the eastern anchor point. It networked all 3. The 3 suppression field anchor positions, the ones built on the corridor's only stable terrain, were not operating independently. They were synchronized through the relay. The relay was the thing that made the positioning work. Remove the relay, and the synchronization broke. And, without synchronization, the fields didn't just become less effective. They turned on each other. The Kreth had built something elegant and it had one load-bearing connection, and they had put it underground because underground was the one place they had been certain their enemies could not reach. 7 hours and 44 minutes, third calm signal. 3 pulses. Prearranged, executing. I stood up from my chair. I noted this, 7 hours and 44 minutes I am standing. I am not certain when I decided to stand. The relay went offline at 7 hours 51 minutes and 33 seconds. I know this not from communication with VASIC's team but because I was watching the Kreth suppression field readings on Bren 9's monitoring system, which we maintained as passive intelligence, not useful for offensive action, historically, but useful for understanding the shape of their defense. The shape of their defense changed in 4 seconds. The 3 suppression fields did not go down cleanly. They tried to resynchronize. Without the relay, the synchronization protocol looped, each field reached for the others, found them reaching back, and the feedback was significant enough that for 11 seconds all 3 fields were at cross purposes. 11 seconds is not a long time. It was long enough. This is the part of the log I have gone back and verified 3 times because the monitoring data is strange and I wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly. In the 11-second window, while the Kreth suppression fields were at cross purposes, the Kreth Mobile Reserve, the 40 heavy units that had successfully repositioned against every previous Veth assault, received conflicting positioning signals from their own coordination network. The Mobile Reserve did not have a protocol for this. They had never needed one. Their positioning had always been tied to the suppression field synchronization, because why would you build a separate protocol for a contingency that couldn't happen? The Kreth Mobile Reserve stopped moving. Not permanently. Not long. Maybe 90 seconds of full confusion before their commanders began issuing manual positioning orders. 90 seconds was not a long time. It was long enough. 7 hours 51 minutes and 33 seconds to 7 hours 52 minutes and 23 seconds, 50-second window. Mobile Reserve non-responsive. And then, my calm lit up. Not a pulse signal. Voice. Vasek, roughened, slightly breathless, from somewhere she was apparently moving through while talking. Sarek. Get your 63 people into the corridor. East approach. Not the channels, the main route, ground level. You have a window. Move now. How long? Move now, Sarek. 7 hours 52 minutes and 23 seconds. I am contacting the Bren 9 combat commander. I am aware I have no authorization for what I am about to say. I am saying it anyway. I want to be precise about my internal state at 7 hours 52 minutes and 23 seconds, because I think it matters and because my log is the only place I have ever been fully honest. I was afraid. I am almost always afraid. I have managed it for 22 years by being extremely thorough and not making decisions without complete information. I did not have complete information at 7 hours 52 minutes and 23 seconds. I had a human voice on a comm telling me to move, and a monitoring readout showing something I had never seen in 4 years, and 41 minutes of silence I had spent eating terrible food and trying to number my way through. I told Commander Thess to mobilize. She looked at me through the comm screen with the expression of someone who was deciding whether to trust a source they have previously considered reliable. On whose authorization? Mine, I said. Log it. 7 hours 52 minutes and 40 seconds, Bren 9 combat units mobilizing. I have created a career problem for myself. I note this without knowing how I feel about it. What happened in the corridor over the next 4 hours is documented in Commander Thess's operational report, which is thorough and accurate and contains none of the texture of what it was like to watch on the monitoring feeds. The Kreth fought back. I want to be clear about this because some accounts of the Bren offensive have elided this. The Kreth were not caught helpless. They responded. Their mobile reserve came back online and repositioned with the competence of a unit that had been doing this for 4 years. Their infantry units contracted and held, which was the correct tactical response to a compromised flank. The suppression fields came back up at 8 hours and 11 minutes. At 8 hours and 11 minutes it should have been over. The corridor assault should have collapsed the way the previous 2 had. Veth forces hitting a reformed defensive line without the window advantage, no way through. I was watching the monitoring feeds at 8 hours and 11 minutes and I was doing the math and the math was not good. And then, I saw Vasek's team. They had not come back through the channels after taking out the relay. In my construction of her plan, which I had apparently been constructing incompletely, I had assumed the relay demolition was the end point of their role, and that they would extract and let the main assault carry the conclusion. They had not extracted. They were inside the perimeter. Not deep. Not in a position to engage the Kreth forces directly. 6 people against 400 was not a fight, it was a notation. But, they were positioned at the eastern edge of the Kreth defensive line, which had contracted inward when the assault began. And, what they were doing was not fighting. They were taking apart the Kreth's forward communication array. Not destroying it. That would have been faster. They were disassembling it in a very specific way. Doran the technician explained this to me in the debrief with the enthusiasm of someone who had genuinely enjoyed the problem that made it appear, to the Kreth coordination network, as though the array was still functioning and transmitting normally. What it was actually transmitting was Vasic's team feeding loop signals back into the Kreth's own communication protocols. The Kreth Mobile Reserve was receiving real-time repositioning orders from their own system, not from their own commanders. I want to be careful about how I characterize what happened next, because I am an intelligence officer and I have seen deception operations before, and I do not want to suggest this was more extraordinary than it was. Vasic's team had a 6-minute window before the Kreth technical staff would identify the intrusion. 6 minutes. They used it to route the mobile reserve to a position on the corridor's western edge, which was, and I need you to understand that this was not a coincidence. This was Vasic looking at the map 4 minutes and touching her scar 18 times before she had agreed to take the mission exactly where Commander Thess's assault units were not. The Kreth Mobile Reserve moved to reinforce an approach that was empty. The approach that was not empty was the one they had just vacated. 8 hours 17 minutes and 44 seconds, Bren 9 assault units breached the eastern defensive line through the gap created by mobile reserve repositioning. Commander Thess reports contact. I note that I am gripping the edge of my monitoring station. I note that I have been doing this for some time. The suppression fields came back fully online at 8 hours and 22 minutes. It was too late. Not because the Veth forces had broken through the entire line, they hadn't. This was not a rout, this was a crack, a single breach in a 4-year wall. But, a breach is a different kind of problem than a wall. A wall is managed. A breach is a decision. The Kreth command had to decide whether to collapse back, reinforce the hull, or hold the existing formation and accept the pressure at the breach point. Every decision was wrong in a different way. The suppression fields were back, but the mobile reserve was on the wrong side of the corridor. The breach was at the one location the fields couldn't fully overlap. The Kreth commanders, who were very good at what they were good at, holding the thing they had built, found themselves doing something the thing was not built to do. Improvising. They were not, it turned out, as good at that. 8 hours and 22 minutes to 9 hours and 47 minutes, Bren corridor breach holds and widens. Kreth begin disengagement from secondary positions. Log continues. I sent a comm to Vasic's team at 8 hours and 30 minutes to authorize extraction. She responded at 8 hours 34 minutes and 12 seconds. What she said was, in a minute. I noted this. 8 hours 34 minutes and 12 seconds, human asset declines authorized extraction. Reason given, in a minute. I do not know what she is doing. I have added this to my list of questions. The list was now 23 items long. I made more protein loaf. The Kreth finished their disengagement from the corridor's northern positions at 11 hours 44 minutes and 17 seconds. I have the exact timestamp because I was watching and, because I time everything and, because I needed something to do with the fact that I was watching a 4-year stalemate end and I did not have a protocol for what to feel about that. The monitoring feeds had been running for 7 hours. My coffee substitute was cold. I had eaten 3 portions of protein loaf, which is 2 more than is advisable, and my internal regulatory system was conducting a quiet protest. The station around me had gone from the low hum of a facility managing its own irrelevance to something louder and harder to categorize, communications flooding in from the forward stations, suddenly reachable, Commander Thess issuing tactical updates in a voice I had not heard her use before, which was the voice of someone who has stopped bracing for bad news and does not yet know what to do with the absence of it. Vasic's team came back through the main corridor gate at 10 hours and 12 minutes. Not the channels. The gate, with everyone else, walking in from the east approach alongside soldiers they had met 6 hours ago when Vasic had looked at their files and decided they were the wrong people in exactly the right way. I was at the gate. I do not know why I was at the gate. My station is not at the gate. I had walked there sometime in the preceding hour without logging the decision, which is the only gap in my cycle log and which I find personally troubling. 10 hours and 12 minutes. Human asset team returns via East Gate approach. I am present. No official reason logged. She looked like she'd been somewhere difficult. That sounds like an obvious thing to say. She had been somewhere difficult. I had extensive documentation of this, but what I mean is that it showed, and, in my experience, the showing is not a given. Soldiers are trained to carry difficult things invisibly. Vasek was not carrying it invisibly. There was channel compound dried in her hair, a cut on her left forearm that had been field sealed but had bled through the sealant, and a very particular expression on her face that my cultural training inadequately classified as post-operational neutral. The scar on her jaw was more visible in direct light. She saw me standing by the gate and said, "You made the call." I did. Good call. She walked past me. I fell into step beside her because I had 23 questions and also because I had filed an unauthorized mobilization order on her say-so and I was owed at minimum a conversation. Vasek. What were you doing between 8:34 and your extraction? She was quiet long enough that I thought she might not answer. She was touching the scar again, not the quick assessing touches from the morning but slower, like checking something, like making sure a thing was still where she'd left it. The Kreth pulled back their eastern infantry before the disengagement, she said. Left a supply cache. Small one. Ration compounds, supplemental power cells, some medical. You took it. I left most of it. But, the fourth station. The one that stopped responding 14 days ago. I stopped walking. She did not. 10 hours 14 minutes and 33 seconds, I have stopped walking in the corridor. Asset continues ahead. I restart my movement after a pause I am not going to quantify because it would be embarrassing. I have thought about this moment many times in the years since. The thing she did between in a minute and returning through the gate. She had not been, as I initially suspected, charitably conducting a rapid intelligence scan of the Kreth supply cache for actionable technical data. She had been going through it for food and medical supplies. And she had taken just enough to not call it looting, and left the rest, and the portion she took she had carried out personally and forwarded as priority cargo to the fourth forward station through the supply route that the corridor breach had just reopened. The station had gone dark 14 days ago because its medical replication unit had failed and 3 of its crew were dying slowly from conditions the remaining medical officer could not treat without material she did not have. The supply cache Vasek had stripped did not fix this. It helped. It gave them enough. I did not know any of this at 10 hours 14 minutes and 33 seconds. I found out 3 days later when I was cross-referencing supply chain logs as part of my operational debrief and I found a cargo entry that should not have existed, forwarded under a requisition number that corresponded to a supply authorization I had not issued and which had been, on inspection, simply invented. I sat with that for a long time. She had taken a detour inside an active conflict zone, while her extraction window was closing, to do a thing that had nothing to do with the operation and which she had no orders to do and which she apparently had not mentioned to anyone, and she had invented a supply authorization code to make it official, which suggested she had planned this before going in, which meant she had looked at the briefing information and pulled out of it a detail about a medical shortage that I, a trained intelligence officer, had flagged as a footnote. I went back and found my own report. Station 4 non-responsive, likely communications failure, medical supply deficit noted as contributing factor, low priority pending corridor resolution. Low priority. Day 3 post-Bren offensive. I am rereading my own intelligence report. I note that I wrote the words low priority with confidence 14 days ago. I note this without comment. The official debrief took 2 days. I will compress this significantly because what happened in the debrief was mostly administrative and the administrative shape of events rarely captures the actual shape of events. The broad outline, High Command reviewed the operational log, determined that the corridor breach was a significant and unexpected success, attributed the success to innovative tactical assessment by attached specialist operative, and classified a portion of the incident record pending further review. The portion they classified included Vasek's communication relay interference, her supply cache deviation, and approximately 40% of my incident log, which they reviewed and, then, flagged under operational security, non-standard methodology. They gave Commander Thess a citation. I got a notation in my file, demonstrated initiative in ambiguous command environment. This is the kind of notation that can be read two ways. I have been reading it both ways for several years now and I am not certain which one they meant. Day 2 post-Bren offensive debrief concluded. Official record reflects approximately 60% of what occurred. I retain a complete copy. I also retain 23 questions, of which I was able to ask Vasic 7. She answered 4. Before she answered, "How did you know about the relay networking the suppression fields?" I didn't. I guessed from the patrol timing. You can see the synchronization pattern in the rotation gaps if you're looking for something that doesn't fit. When did you plan the supply cache? Before I got in the container. Why didn't you log it? A pause. The scar. Then, because if I logged it I'd have had to justify it, and justifying it would have taken time I didn't have, and I wasn't sure it would work, and I didn't want it to become a thing that got decided against on paper. What are the 3 questions you're not answering? She smiled at this. I had not seen her smile before. It was a more alarming expression than I would have predicted, not because it was unkind but because it was entirely genuine, which is somehow more disorienting than deception. Later, she said. Day 2 post-Bren asset departs Bren 9 via authorized transport. Departure logged at 14 hours 3 minutes and 22 seconds. Log of the 3 unanswered questions. 1. How did she know the corridor layout on arrival? 2. How long had she been planning this operation before the container? 3. Why did she come alone? The third question is the one I keep returning to. She had arrived in a cargo container. I have revisited this fact many times. Not the method makes a kind of operational sense that I can follow even if I would not have chosen it. The aloneness of it. The Bren corridor had been a 4-year military stalemate that had consumed significant resources and personnel and institutional optimism. High command had been running low on all 3. The official assessment was strategic patience, which as I noted was a phrase meaning the absence of strategy. And Vasic had looked at it, or had been told about it, or had read a report, or had seen a footnote in someone else's briefing, and had gotten into a cargo container by herself and come to look at it directly. Not because she was ordered to. I checked. I had the authorizations reviewed twice. No orders. I am an intelligence officer. I am very familiar with the concept of unauthorized action. It is one of the primary things I am trained to prevent, document, and refer to the appropriate command structure for adjudication. I have filed many reports on unauthorized action. I did not file one on this. I have a reason for this that I am able to articulate clearly. I made a judgment call that the operational benefit outweighed the procedural irregularity. This reason is accurate. It is also not the complete reason, and I am an honest logger, so I will include the rest. I did not file the report because I did not want the full account of what she had done to be processed into the administrative language that turns specific things into general things. Non-standard methodology. Innovative tactical assessment. Contributing specialist operative. She had gotten into a box. She had gotten into a box because there was a problem that had been sitting for 4 years and she had decided to look at it herself, and she had looked at it for 4 minutes, and she had identified a door everyone else had decided was a wall. And, then, she had gone in. Not with a mandate or a unit or a plan that was finished. With 6 people she'd chosen for their particular kinds of wrong and a theory and a supply authorization she'd invented and a list of things she was willing to improvise. She had gotten 4 questions. She'd answered 4. 3 she hadn't. I keep the 3 unanswered ones because they are the most honest record of what I do not understand. And what I do not understand about Vasic, about that 11-hour window, about the whole of it is not the tactics. The tactics I can follow now when I lay them out in the log. What I do not understand is the entry point. The decision to get in the box. It's been some time since Bren. The 4th station is operational. The corridor is Veth controlled. Commander Thess was promoted. Prith is still at Bren 9, but his eyes are different now, less like someone who has revised their understanding of how bad things can get and more like someone who was quietly revising their understanding of what is possible. This is, I suspect, an irreversible condition. I have been promoted once and demoted once and am currently in a lateral position that I find more interesting than either, which I think is the correct outcome for someone whose file contains the phrase demonstrated initiative and ambiguous command environment followed by a classification flag. I still eat alone. I still make terrible food and drink worse substitutes and timestamp everything compulsively. I have filed 612 incident logs since Bren. Only one of them has ever felt like the incomplete record. Basics 3 unanswered questions remain unanswered. I have learned things in the intervening time that have answered 2 of them, at least partially, and what I have learned has made me considerably more interested in the third. But this is not the log for that. This log ends here. Log entry, final notation, cycle 1144 operational record, incident classification, Bren corridor offensive, supporting action, non-standard methodology, filing officer, Sorek Velthan, Veth intelligence, 3rd grade, timestamp, 14 hours 3 minutes and 22 seconds, asset departure. Log closed. She got into the box. I still don't understand why that's the part one keep coming back to. Maybe that's the point.